I've sat in enough offices at the end of enough meetings to know that moment. The form is complete, the client is signed, and yet something in the room says the whole story didn't make it onto the page. I've spent my career trying to understand that gap, not to close it with more paperwork, but to understand what's actually asking of us. I'm Jeffery. I've spent my entire career inside of wealth management, working alongside advisors to help them build practices that hold up ethically, professionally, and under scrutiny. That work gave me a front row seat to something most people in this industry never see all at once: how leadership, regulation, and advisors themselves have to move together in balance for a client to actually receive good advice. But the longer I sat inside that world, the more I noticed something the industry wasn't talking about. So I went back to school, first for a master's in counseling and psychology, and eventually to start my doctorate, where I'm currently studying how financial advisors think, decide, and communicate under pressure. The combination of years inside of compliance and my education and training isn't common. And this is what led me to the question that I've spent the last several years trying to answer. Behavioral finance changed the industry in a really important way. It proved that emotion drives financial decisions, and that clients are never purely rational, and that money is never just numbers. But as I studied it closer, I noticed it was only telling half the story. All of the attention went to the client, their biases, their emotional patterns, their blind spots, and almost nothing was said about the person sitting across the table asking the questions. Advisors are human too. They carry their own history with money, their own upbringing, their own instincts into every single meeting, whether they realize it or not. You can't fully understand someone else's decision making if you haven't first understood your own. That question, what about the advisor, became the center of my doctoral research, and it changed how I think about what knowing your client actually means. What I found, working with advisors across the country, is that they aren't struggling because they don't know the rules. Most advisors know exactly what the form requires. What they are missing is something that no one ever taught them: how to sit with a conversation that doesn't neatly fit into a box, how to notice their own discomfort in the room and not let it steer the conversation, how to ask a question they'd honestly rather not hear the answer to, because that's often where the truth lies. Regulators have started asking for this very thing too. They call it professional judgment, but nobody has ever really taught advisors what that looks like or given them a way to see their own part in it. That gap between what advisors are asked to do and what they're actually being equipped to do is the work that I do now. So much of my work now is about helping advisors see their clients differently, not through a questionnaire and not through a checklist, but through a real understanding of the life that sits across from them. Illness, job loss, family tension, ambition, fear, all of it shapes financial decision long before a form ever does. I also help advisors see themselves differently, because the advisor's own history, their own defaults under pressure, are just as much a part of that conversation as the clients are. When an advisor understands what they bring into the room, they stop reacting to what makes them uncomfortable and start actually listening. And later, in an advisor's career, that same self-understanding matters in a different way. I work with advisors who are quietly avoiding the hardest conversation of all: when and how to step back from a practice they've built their whole identity around. That isn't a paperwork problem either. It's a human problem, and it deserves to be treated like one. Different moments in an advisor's career, same underlying idea. The advisor is never separate from the advice that they give. When advisors do this work, the shift isn't loud, but it's real. Meetings feel less like a script and more like a conversation. Difficult moments, the ones advisors used to rush past or avoid altogether, become easier to sit inside of. And clients notice too. They feel heard, not processed. And advisors stop leaving messages wondering what they missed because they're finally asking the questions that get them the truth. This isn't therapy. It isn't soft skills. It's what happens when advisors are finally given permission and the tools to bring their full judgment into the room. I didn't build this because the industry asked me to. I built it because I kept watching advisors get told to have these meaningful conversations without anyone ever explaining what that means or acknowledging that the advisor is a person too, carrying their own story into every meeting that they hold. Clients deserve advisors who can sit with what isn't tidy. Advisors deserve to be seen as more than a form filler. And I believe the work that happens between two people, when it's done with real awareness, is worth protecting. This is the work I do, and the story I'm still learning more about every day. If it resonates with you, I'd love for you to follow along and stay connected. There's more of this conversation still to come.